what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump vowed to retain military assets in the Middle East until a peace deal with Iran is reached and warned of a major escalation in fighting if failed to comply as oil prices rose on concerns over supply and restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz. Israel carried out its heaviest strikes on Lebanon since the conflict with Hezbollah broke out last month, killing more than 250 people as the Iran-aligned group resumed rocket attacks on northern Israel after a brief pause under the two-week US-Iran ceasefire. US President Donald Trump vented his frustration with NATO during a private meeting with its Secretary General Mark Rutte as relations in military alliance reached a crisis point over the Iran war. British Foreign Minister Yvette Cooper has said the UK strongly wanted to see Lebanon included in the ceasefire in the Middle East. Israel said the airstrikes were planned for weeks and targeted Hezbollah. Facing daily barrages of Russian drones and missiles, Ukraine has invited private companies to get their own air defense systems in a bid to ease the burden on its military. Millions of Indians queued to vote in local elections in 2 states today, kicking off 4 key contests over this month amid a war in the Middle East that has triggered some fuel shortages. A shallow 4.9 magnitude earthquake struck eastern Indonesia overnight, damaging dozens of homes and injuring multiple people. 4 astronauts travelling back to Earth from the far side of the moon on NASA's Artemis II mission spoke of their emotions as they wrapped up the unprecedented flight and prepared to re-enter the atmosphere in a fireball. The Artemis II crew are due to splash down off the Southern California coast on Friday evening. Taiwanese opposition leader Cheng Li-wan, chairwoman of the Kuomintang, pledges to seek reconciliation with China. The pledge comes after a visit to tomb of Sun Yat-sen, founder of the Kuomintang. And for your top stories this hour, according to reports, Israeli authorities have expressed extreme dissatisfaction with the United States' handling of the ceasefire with Iran. Sources indicate that Washington notified Tel Aviv of the truce at the last minute and without prior consultation. US President Donald Trump reportedly called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu shortly before the public announcement, while Israel ultimately agreed to participate in the ceasefire. The lack of coordination has caused significant friction between the two allies. A primary point of contention was the initial US demand to include Lebanon in the ceasefire agreement. Israeli officials flatly rejected this proposal, leading to a public declaration from Tel Aviv that it does not intend to cease its military campaign against the Shia group Hezbollah. Simultaneously, Iran is framing the two-week window as a strategic trial for Washington. Tehran's ambassador to Ashgabat stated that the ceasefire offers a critical opportunity to test the sincerity of the Americans. We are now being joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, who's an international affairs analyst, joining us live from Brussels. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. Has the US handling of this ceasefire exposed cracks in its strategic coordination with Israel, especially if Tel Aviv was informed at the very last minute? And that's when they rejected Lebanon to be included, so they had to come out themselves and state this.
Well, we're touching upon a fundamental issue in the US-Israeli relations. Who is the head and who is the tail? And the United States, by excluding Israel from these talks, since it knew that they would try to sabotage the talks, demonstrated that the United States is the head and that Israel is the tail. Now we have the Israeli journalists and politicians complaining and saying that they should have been consulted. It's the same, it's an analogy to what's going on here in Europe with respect to the Ukraine-Russia war. Those who want to ruin the negotiations, like the Europeans, insist on a place at the table. Those who want to ruin the peace in the Middle East, the Israelis, they insist on a place on the table. Both groups have very properly been excluded from the table because the principals, here it's the United States and the Middle East, wants to have the problem solved. Mr. Trump cannot allow this to continue because he is becoming the most hated man in the world.
And with reports of this friction between Washington and Tel Aviv, how serious is it that this is happening, this rift, tactical disagreement is happening, and everyone around the world is watching this, especially, very, very closely?
Well, it has been a taboo to say anything critical about Israelis' actions, however heinous they may be. What we see in front of our eyes today is a changing landscape. Several European countries, including Britain and France, have said that Israel must stop its bombing of Lebanon. The fact that Donald Trump's envoys accepted without discussion the 10 points put forward by Iran as their terms for the end of the war, which essentially are terms that we can call a capitulation of the United States or a surrender of the United States accepted those terms. And part of those terms was precisely to seek a regional solution to the Middle East, and not just an Iran, US, Israel solution to the Middle East. This was insistent by Iran. They do not want Israel to have the right selectively to make war on any members of the regional member states.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Dr. O, please stay with us as I'll be joining back with you very shortly. A high-level delegation of ambassadors from 30 NATO nations is scheduled to visit Japan in mid-May to study Tokyo's successful management of its relationship with the United States. According to reports, the mission following scathing criticism of the alliance from the US President Donald Trump, who recently labelled NATO a paper tiger and claimed it failed to provide adequate support during the 39-day US-Israeli war in Iran. The diplomats aim to gain insights into how Japan maintained strong ties with Washington while balancing regional security demands. The visit, which includes a stop at the US naval base in Yokosuka and a subsequent trip to South Korea, comes as the Trump administration considers drastic measures against unhelpful European allies. Reports suggest that the White House is weighing a plan to withdraw US troops from nations that restricted airspace or refused military support during Operation Epic Fury, such as Spain and Germany, and relocate them to more supportive partners like Poland, Romania or Greece. We are now again being rejoined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow. Thank you for joining us back here for this. After being labelled a paper tiger by President Trump, is NATO facing a credibility crisis, or is this pressure forcing it to redefine its strategic role?
Well, if the United States pulls back from NATO, I don't say leaves NATO, because President Trump does not have the authority to make such decisions. It's Congress that does it. But if he weakens the American presence in NATO by withdrawing troops or moving them somewhere else, then of course NATO essentially collapses. It will exist. There will be an entity called NATO, but its ability to pursue the role originally designed for it, which is to keep Russia out of Europe, then it will be a total failure. It doesn't have the wherewithal, it doesn't have the delivery means, it doesn't have the basic armaments to contain Russia. And so it is indeed a paper tiger.
And why is Japan being seen as a model partner? What lessons can NATO allies realistically adopt from Tokyo's approach to managing ties with Washington?
I think it's premature to say that Japan has successfully managed its relations with Washington. One visit to Washington does not mean that the Japanese-U.S. relations are perfect. After all, one of the lessons that came out of the Japanese premier's discussions with Trump, even before the visit, was just say no. Trump insisted that Japan, this is before the Iran war, stop buying Russian oil, and the lady prime minister said no. We absolutely need that oil, so we don't even discuss it. So in that sense, the Japanese were more successful by saying no than Mark Rutte was by speaking to Trump as daddy. The daddy routine no longer provides cover or satisfies members of the European Union.
And if the US begins rewarding, like he said, supportive allies while penalising others, does this risk fragmenting NATO into competing blocs rather than a unified alliance?
Well, it doesn't risk, it's happening already. Let's take this from the future to time present. NATO is deeply divided. And with regards to those who want to have the daddy approach and those who want to have the just say no approach. So NATO is falling apart between our eyes. To speak of becoming blocs is not really helpful, because NATO either exists as unity or it doesn't exist at all. Now, let's keep in mind that if they're going to if Washington is going to rely on the support or continuing relationships with countries that have supported it, it'll have nobody left. You mentioned Poland in passing, but that is incorrect. Poland refused to assist the United States in the Middle East in the Iran war. So there may be a few small countries like the Baltics, which altogether are a population of about 4 million, all three of them, and have armies that we could call a small police force if you're looking at normal countries. They may support NATO and Mr. Trump all the way, but nobody else, no serious country, supports the heinous crimes that Mr. Trump is committing in his war against Iran.
And as we know, throughout this conflict, Trump has been very vocal in saying about how disappointed he is about NATO and basically how annoyed he is because they haven't stepped up to join in. With Trump also saying they plan to withdraw troops from countries like Spain and Germany, fundamentally, could this reshape Europe's security architecture? And how do you think these countries like Spain and Germany are going to take this and react back to it?
Well, it certainly is changing the security architecture because from having something that looked like a fortress, they now have a group of tents in the desert. NATO, without the United States active participation, has no military force to speak of. So how will it affect the architecture? Well, if people wake up, if the leadership in Europe wants to have a serious discussion with a psychiatrist, which it needs badly, it would find that the best thing to do when you have an enemy is to try to sit at the table and make up with them so that you can survive and flourish. The security architecture will change as it sinks into the minds of European leaders that the United States is unreliable, that the United States is committing war crimes, that with allies like this, who needs enemies? And Europe is moving away from the United States simply because the United States, in front of our eyes, is violating in the crassest way European values. Accordingly, Europe will reorganize. It will reach out to Russia at some point, and they will define a new security architecture for Europe, which does not include the United States or the powers outside of Europe that are in NATO.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, for joining us here today. It's a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you. Israel has intensified its military campaign in Lebanon, carrying out fresh strikes on towns across the eastern and southern regions and escalating tensions along the border. The expanded offensive comes amid the growing international concern over the scale and impact of the bombardment, particularly on civilian areas and infrastructure. Meanwhile, strong reactions have emerged from key global powers as the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary David Lammy described Israel's actions as deeply damaging, warning that continued strikes risk further destabilization in the region. French Foreign Minister Stéphane Séjourné has also called the strikes unacceptable, urging restraint and a renewed push for diplomatic de-escalation. Furthermore, China has stressed that Lebanon's sovereignty should not be violated and calling for respect for international law and territorial integrity. We are now being joined by Gleb Barukov, who's an international affairs expert. Thank you so much, Gleb, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Now, as we just heard, there's been many reactions and many statements that have come out from many countries about Israel's decision to still attack Lebanon, but not just attack. They said today and this morning that they've been planning these attacks for weeks, this high-scale strikes on the country. Is this a tactical escalation against Hezbollah or a broader strategy that risks widening this conflict, even now so that more leaders are getting involved and speaking about this as well?
Hello. Yes, it's a pleasure joining you as always. Answering your question, I think my opinion is that the moves by Israel are tactical. However, it's part of a broader strategy. I think what Israel is trying to do, their global goals in terms of fighting their enemies in the east, and I think they're just basically using the pretext, the opportunity to try to cause as much damage to their so-called enemies. Now, one thing to consider is that their enemies are actually deeply rooted into a very much civilian state. So, any military action that Israel is taking will cause necessarily major damage to civilian infrastructure and loss of life. So the actions that Israel is taking by trying to use this closing window of opportunity of US having attacked Iran, I think it's quite appalling. Because what they're trying to do, they're basically trying to squeeze, all of their planned attacks into, a time frame of 24 hours, which effectively will lead to major, casualties and destruction of civilian infrastructure. So, yes, I totally support the international community, which is condemning those strikes. I think this is totally unacceptable. And ultimately, Israel will not achieve the desired effects. It may kill, tens, maybe hundreds of Hezbollah supporters or militants, but it will not eradicate Hezbollah from Lebanon, because this is their home turf. This is where they live. This is where they're based. And they control pretty much, the whole government and military structure there. And neither Israel nor United States can change this, unless you completely wipe the country clean, there is no way of changing the social structure. So, and I'm pretty sure that someone, in the Israeli government or US government must be understanding this. Okay. However, it looks like the current policy and the current tactics are driven by hotheads who are just, trying to push their crazy agenda forward. So yes, in that situation where, effectively Israel is hiding behind the American military force, it's sad, but I don't think much can be done here, unless there is a firm stance from the United States, actually, forcing Israel to abide by the ceasefire.
And at a time when global powers are calling for restraint, is there still a viable path to de-escalation, or has the situation already crossed that point of no return?
Well, de-escalation can be achieved, in a matter of 10 minutes. It's just the decision-making by the military leadership within Israel and the United States. Because before this conflict has started, there's been no military action in the Middle East. Middle East has been a relatively quiet region, obviously with its own problems and tensions, but there was no military action. The military action was started by the US-Israeli alliance. So the only way to end it is if this alliance, if the military leaders, the top leadership, basically decides to stop this, So yes, this can be stopped in literally a matter of 10, 15 minutes. Whether there is any political will or change of opinion or change of heart that might have happened in the last, few days, I don't know. It's hard to tell. Certainly, Israel, it looks like Israel is trying to use every single opportunity to blast and bombard, Hezbollah and Iran, because they are their, lifetime adversaries. So I think all the final decision rests with the United States, with Mr. Trump or whoever else is controlling, this military action, whether it's Trump himself or, some of his close circle.
Thank you so much, Gleb, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It was lovely speaking with you. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has arrived in the United Arab Emirates on the second leg of his trip to Gulf countries amid signs the US-Iran ceasefire is coming under strain. The Prime Minister is visiting allies in the region for talks on upholding the pause in fighting and what steps are needed to bring confidence to get shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz. He spoke out to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah and is expected to meet UAE President today. Starmer has welcomed the 2-week pause in US President Donald Trump's bombing campaign, but said it is early days and that more work needs to be done to restore shipping through the key route. The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem has reopened its doors to worshippers today after a 40-day closure enforced by Israeli authorities during the conflict with Iran. Hundreds of Muslims gathered at the holy site for dawn prayers, marking the first time the compound has been accessible since it was shuttered on February the 28th for security measures. While the reopening brought scenes of gratitude and prayer, tensions flared later in the day as groups of Jewish visitors entered the compound under police escort. The move comes less than 24 hours after the US-brokered ceasefire took effect, but the delicate status quo remains under significant strain. Muslim worshippers described the presence of Jewish visitors as a provocation, fearing a shift in the decades-old arrangement that allows non-Muslims to visit but forbids them from praying. The site, administered by a Jordanian religious trust, remains a focal point of regional volatility, even as direct hostilities with Iran have paused.
40 يوما يعني كان هناك شوق لأني من المسجد الأقصى لمصليه يعني لأنه 40 يوما كان في الحزن من قلة المصلين ومنعهم من الدخول إلى أداء عباداتهم ولكن الحمد لله الذي من علينا بأن نعود وتحيا الصلاة في المسجد الأقصى بإذنه سبحانه وتعالى. رسالتنا بشد الرحال إلى المسجد الأقصى في كل وقت وفي كل حين ليبقى المسجد الأقصى بإذنه سبحانه وتعالى عامرا بالصلوات بإذنه سبحانه وتعالى. فبارك الله في كل من شد الرحال لهذه الصلاة وفي كل صلاة بإذنه سبحانه وتعالى. بارك الله.
A worker trapped for 2 weeks after a mine collapsed in northwestern Mexico has now been rescued. 2 other workers died when the gold and silver mine on the state of Sinaloa caved in on March the 25th, trapping 4 men. 1 miner was rescued on March the 30th and a diver located the other survivor on Tuesday night. Claudia Sheinbaum said, incredibly and fortunately, he was found alive. Hundreds of rescuers had worked that day and night for 2 weeks, using specialized water extraction equipment to reach the miners. According to authorities, the mine caved in due to a water failure, which compromised its structure. In August 2022, a mine collapse in the northern state of Coahuila killed 10 workers. In that same state in 2006, 65 miners died in an explosion at the Pasta de Conchos coal mine. Listen in to what the Mexican leader had to say.
Cerca de las familias. Y ayer, después de 13 días, se encontró a uno de los mineros con vida todavía. Todavía no lo pueden sacar porque fueron buzos quienes se metieron en un lugar donde había mucha agua. Están esperando el bombeo de agua para poder sacar al minero.
That is all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.